In this section, we're going to use first derivatives to be able to find out whether or not the function's increasing or decreasing. So the first thing I want to mention is that if f prime of x is greater than 0, meaning that f prime of x is positive, then f is increasing. If we see that f prime of x is negative or less than 0, then we know that the function is decreasing. We're going to use a first derivative test. Well, let me go back to this picture. I didn't really talk about, we can talk about the slopes of the tangent lines. You can see how they're positive, and you can see how the function's increasing. We have critical point right here, meaning the slope of the tangent line is 0. We have the slope of the tangent lines to the curve being negative. Notice how it's decreasing right through here. I also mentioned about critical points that they can be undefined at corners and cusps. The first derivative test is a test that we're going to use, and what we're going to do is we're going to first find the f prime of x. Once we find that derivative, we're going to test things from on the left of that value and on the right of that value to find out what's going on with the slope of the tangent lines. So notice on this picture, if the slope of the tangent lines are positive, then they change over to being negative. We know that we're going to have a max, and that's what the first derivative test allows me to do, is tell whether I have a relative max or a min. If f prime of x changes from negative to positive, we know that the graph is decreasing, then increasing, so therefore I have a minimum. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to look at this graph, and we're just going to write down the intervals of increasing and the increasing and decreasing intervals. So if I look at this picture, I notice that my graph is increasing, 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 increasing until it hits 0 right here. So I'm going to go ahead and say that from negative infinity to 0, it's increasing. Then from 0 to 1, from 0 to 1, notice I'm using I'm using parentheses, meaning that those values are not included because the value at 0 has the slope of the tangent line of 0, and here at 1, the slope of the tangent line is 0 as well. So it's not positive or negative. So again, the slope of the tangent lines of the curves are positive here, so I know it's increasing. Then the slope of the tangent lines of the curves are negative, so I know that this part is decreasing. And then the last part, from 1 to infinity, those slopes of the tangent lines are all increasing. So we are able to name the intervals of increase or decrease by looking at a graph or by looking at the derivative. The next problem we're going to look at is one where they don't give me a picture. Now, of course, I could use my graphing calculator to come up with a picture, but we're not going to do that. We're going to compute the first derivative, and we're going to test those values. So when I take the first derivative, actually, let's go ahead and rewrite this first. Let's say y equals x plus 4x to the negative 1. Now let's go ahead and take the derivative. I get 1 plus negative 4x to the negative second. It's imperative that I change it out of this form. So I'm going to say it's 1 plus, this would be negative 4 over x squared. It's going to be much easier to solve for my y prime. I want to know where those critical numbers are, so I'm going to set it equal to 0. And we're going to test those values. So I've got, when I move over my 4 over x squared to the other side, 4 over x squared equals 1. I'm going to come up here to finish this. I will go ahead and cross multiply. So when I cross multiply, I get 4 equals x squared, and then I'll square root both sides, which gives me plus or minus 2. Now, I'm going to also take note that not only do I have critical numbers at 2 and negative 2, I also have a critical number because at x equals 0, the y prime is undefined or does not exist. So I also need to include 0 as a value of testing whether it's positive or negative. Now, when I go to test the values, I'm going to test whether or not their slopes of the tangent lines of the curve are positive or negative. So I'm just going to pick a value between 0 and 1 first. I could start down here on the end, but I'm not going to. So between 0 and 1, what is the slope of the tangent line? I don't actually have to have the exact value. I will actually continue this on the next video.